Welcome to the first ever podcast episode of Reading Red Flags. My name is Manal, and I am so excited to explore the dark and the deep side in books. For example, currently my husband and I were watching The House of the Dragon, and my question is, why do we love Daemon so much? And I think it's because literature can be a mirror for society, and the empathy that we feel answers questions within our own souls. It helps us go just a little bit deeper. So on this podcast, we're going to explore why we love characters like Daemon Targaryen, Amy Dunn from Gone Girl, Dorian Gray from A Picture of Dorian Gray, Sherlock's Moriarty, and Dr. Frankenstein. Together, we'll be answering questions like, is Becky Sharp from Vanity Fair a villain or just a realistic woman of her time with a handsome yet feckless husband who did what she had to do in order to survive? By answering these kind of questions and going into books like Divine Comedy, The Broken Earth, The Handmaid's Tale, Lolita, reading Lolita in Tehran, Macbeth, Frankenstein, The Secret History, and Vanity Fair, and modern classics as well, we're going to get deeper into books that raise red flags. Together, you and I are going to find out more about ourselves. Now, reading red flags, let's get started. So the book we have for today is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne De Maurier. She is best known for her book, Rebecca. And Rebecca is amazing, but My Cousin Rachel, in my opinion, is even more amazing because it's even more ambiguous. The question in this novel is the main character, Rachel, is she a villain or is she just out to be loved? This question haunts every single page of the book, and the narrator, his name is Philip. Rachel is going to arrive to his house as a widow of his cousin. She's his cousin, but she's also a widow of Philip's cousin. Together, let's look at the red flags. The first character, and the character that has the most red flags, in my opinion, is Philip. He is our narrator. He was raised only by men. In the beginning, in the first chapter, you're already introduced to the fact that he was brought up in a homosocial setting. What is a homosocial setting? It is when it's usually in literature. It's that kind of Greek setting where men are only allowed in this space of intellect and intimacy. Philip lives in this kind of setting. His cousin Ambrose has hated women, and he's also the guardian of Philip. He has raised Philip. In the beginning of the first chapter, Ambrose tests him when Philip is only 7 years old. He takes Philip to see a dead man that was hanged as a warning to live a sober life. And Philip had been scared for it after seeing this, and he had nightmares after seeing it. And he was so terrified that he had to hid it from Ambrose to look like he was man enough. So he secretly goes into a corner and throws up. Philip specifically says about Ambrose that Ambrose is the god of my own narrow world, and the whole object of my life was to resemble him. From that age, he has his recollection of when he was 7 and this happened, and he's thinking back to that time, and he says this quote. It shows that Philip is starting off on this wrong foot, right? He wants to emulate this person who was trying to test him by showing him a dead hanged man, and that he hates women completely. Philip is growing up in this situation, and that to me is a red flag. His upbringing is a red flag. The treatment of women continues as Philip grows up. His best friend, Louise, he keeps on shunning her. She comes out to help him. He constantly shows her that he has other priorities. The second red flag that Philip has is he gets jealous after Ambrose, his guardian, gets married. He says that he has no feeling in my heart at all, numb with misery. When Ambrose finally dies in Italy, Philip rushes over to see what happened, and he's filled with this jealousy. He's 100% sure that someone killed him, even though illness runs in Ambrose's family. When he gets there, he's told by a lawyer where Ambrose's grave is, and listen to this. Philip does not go to pay respects at Ambrose's grave. That to me is culturally shocking. The idea that you do not get to see a loved one's grave when it's a doorstep away, especially when that happened in a foreign country. To me, that is the first thing I would want to do if my cousin got murdered, especially if that cousin had been my guardian throughout my life. The next red flag, Philip hears about Rachel's lawyer, Rinaldi. He hears about this in Ambrose's letter, and Ambrose's letter, in it, he says that he's jealous of Rinaldi because of the friendship that his wife, Rachel, has with Rinaldi. That's toxic, that your husband is jealous of your male acquaintances, especially a good acquaintance. And when Philip rushes over to Italy, he carries on this jealousy, and immediately when he sees Rinaldi, he freaks out. He just hates the man for no reason, even though Rinaldi is extremely civil. That's another red flag. And going further into the letters that Ambrose sends from Italy, where he had been living until he died with his wife, Rachel, he writes that, or at least he hints that, marital issues are cropping up with Rachel. He mentions that Rachel is my torment. And this is about 1 year after they have been married. To me, as a married woman, I know that the first year of marriage is the hardest adjustment, especially if you've never lived with the other person before. The fact that he calls her torment is normal. That's how normal marriages work. They are an adjustment. They are coming together of two souls, two living standards. And the fact that Philip takes these quotes like, Rachel is my torment, Rachel, my torment, Rachel, he takes them out of context and think, she must have murdered him. She must have poisoned him. No way he could have fallen sick, even though illness runs in his family. When he meets Rinaldi in Italy, on page 57, Philip stubbornly assumes, he says, these two letters are not the letters of a sick man, of a person ill. These are the letters of a man who has enemies, who is surrounded by people he cannot trust. And then he says, why did this Italian watch my eyes? Obviously, Rinaldi will be watching him if he's assuming murder without evidence, based on Ambrose calling Rachel his torment, which again, like I mentioned, is something normal that happens within the first year of marriage. And the fact that Philip feels that Rinaldi is watching him and it's kind of cold, he's a damn lawyer. Of course he's going to be businesslike. All I knew was that I hated Rinaldi is what he thinks. Even when Rinaldi presents him medical records of how Ambrose died that has been signed off by actual doctors, his response is that you must be lying. Again, red flag. Somebody who cannot look at evidence in the eye and take it, right? This is how the novel is set up. He then goes on to say, I swore that whatever it had cost Ambrose in pain and suffering before he died, I would return it in full measure upon the woman who had caused it. Okay, red flag raised. You know what this podcast needs? It needs like the button. You know how podcasters have a button, like a game show, that goes red flag, red flag, red flag, or like make some noise? Well, I need that. Now, this is the vilifying of Rachel before she arrives. And of course, like, he's never had a woman in his life, neither as a mother, neither as a governess, neither as someone who lives in the house and adds feminine touches in the house, right? His only interaction with women is Louise, who he dismisses all the time, despite her being his best friend. So finally, let's go a bit forward into the book. Rachel arrives after being widowed to the house that should have been hers, but Ambrose does not leave the house to her. He leaves her with no pension, even though Rachel is his widow. Strange, right? So when Rachel arrives, she arrives just out of her own goodwill. At least that's what Philip is told. She's bringing all of Ambrose's stuff from Italy as a present for Philip. But when she arrives, he's out of the house. He doesn't want to be in the house when she arrives. He goes out on a walk for hours so as not to meet her when she arrives. Again, red flag. You have a visitor who is your family by blood and who is your family through marriage. Crazy. Now, when Rachel arrives, she tries so hard to make good conversation when Philip walks into her boudoir. She has tears in her eyes when she gives Philip a gift that had belonged to Ambrose before. This point, Philip immediately melts, and he gets so comfortable in her presence that he falls asleep, guys. He falls asleep. He kind of feels like she's a nurse as an afterthought when she tells him, like, Philip, you're nearly asleep. Will you please get up and go to bed? He says, like, oh, she felt like a nurse. And by nurse, like a governess. And he gets that comfortable immediately. After the first encounter that Rachel and Philip have together, he changes his opinion and they open up with each other. And Rachel says that Ambrose, his nature changed after he started obsessing over Rachel. In the way as if someone found religion, suddenly finding religion and starting to obsess over religion. And this metaphor is taken from Rachel's mouth herself in the book. She says explicitly that Ambrose started making mistakes after he started realizing that he was getting obsessed with Rachel. And you know what? I think this is foreshadowing. I mean, of course I've read the book. It is foreshadowing. Philip will do the same thing Ambrose does. Throughout the entire book, Philip is just following in the footsteps of Ambrose. He takes the opinions that he has as Bible. He takes his obsessions as his Bible. He wants to run the house as Ambrose would have seen fit. He wants to protect Ambrose's reputation and find out how, if he was killed despite only having letters suggesting marital strife. Marital strife, again, ladies and gentlemen, does not equal someone murdering the other. And this is where it starts to get slightly erotic. On page 146, Philip tells Rachel that people find her beautiful, and then he says, and he's kind of led on by Rachel herself, he says, I like looking at you. Mind you, this is your cousin and is the widow of your cousin. And the immediate intimacy that he starts with Rachel is a big red flag. And mind you, this book takes place in the 1800s, though it is written in the 1950s. He becomes bossy to Rachel and she to him. He says to her, will you be quiet? You shall visit this place. And he commands her like a boss. And whenever Rachel feels like she's overstayed, and a house that doesn't belong to her, and it's improper for her to stay that long, Philip keeps convincing Rachel to stay longer. He says to her on page 170, all I know is that I like it now you are here, and I don't want you to go. Clearly this guy has abandonment issues. He was an orphan raised by his cousin, and he's idolizing Rachel for being this adorable, larger-than-life figure for him, just like Ambrose was. And then he tells her to stay for a few months, using her love of gardening to convince her to stay as an excuse. He tells her that she can make the garden of the estate as she wills, and he knows that she loves gardening. And then this red flag on page 177 shocked me. Rachel has traditional knowledge of medications and herbs from Italy, and she says that if you drink a certain tisana, which is I think an herbal blend, a woman can have a baby without pain. And Philip says to that, that's witchcraft. They wouldn't think it right to do so. And Rachel replies, what nonsense. Why should women suffer? Philip thinks that women not having childbirth pain is weird, and women would not want to find a solution for that. That, my friends, is a red flag. Around the 300-page mark, Philip proposes, at least in his mind. He gives her a very oblique, metaphorical marriage proposal, which she does not understand, which I did not understand either. Without any context, he did not give her any context. And she obviously, the next day when the topic comes up, she was shocked to know that what he had said was a marriage proposal. Again, the fact that he thinks that she's as obsessed with him as he is obsessed with her is a red flag. Then, when he realizes that she doesn't want to marry him and she doesn't think of him in that way, he grabs her throat, so much so that she can't speak, and tells her, never leave me. Swear it. Never, never. He lets her go and then says, "Will you marry me now?" That's scary. That's so scary. And after this incident, Rachel brings somebody else to stay in the house with them, somebody that she trusts, so then that she doesn't have to stay with Philip alone in the house. When that stranger, who is actually Miss Mary Pascoe, when she comes to stay over because Rachel asks her, and after this choking incident, this assault, that's when Rachel's attitude with Philip changes. She goes from hot to cold. She starts locking her doors in his madness. Or the notes in the book say meningitis. I'm not sure which one. It might be both, honestly. Philip gets ill. He's on bed rest, and Rachel takes care of him for 5 weeks. Every single day, she's making her herbal tisana teas for him. She's giving it to him, helping him get better, supporting him. And yet, at the end of these 5 weeks, he harbors the suspicion against Rachel that she must be poisoning me with laburnum seeds. And laburnum seeds are not that poisonous, by the way. And if she wanted to kill you in 5 weeks, she would have found the opportunity with any herbs and no one would have ever found out. Why would she then help you and nurse you back to health over 5 weeks? Those are all the red flags I have to give away right now about Philip. I don't want to go into more depth about the red flags because that would give away a lot of the interesting middle plot and the ending plot of the novel. I've already given away a lot, but it will not ruin your enjoyment of the book. Now I want to go on to the red flags of Rachel, and then at the end I want to compare the red flags of Rachel and the red flags of Philip to see who is evil and who is good, because as I mentioned, the entire novel rotates on this question: is Rachel innocent or is she evil? Any facts we have about her are through the lens of Philip because he is a narrator, the first person narrator. So let's get going with Rachel. I actually want to start with a green flag about Rachel. The second she arrives home, all the animals are attached to her. The horse loves her, and the dogs love her to pieces. They abandon following Philip around the house, and they go immediately to Rachel for comfort. Even Philip's dog, Old Don, who was his pal since he was a kid, he abandons Philip for Rachel. If that isn't a green flag, I don't know what is. For example, my mom always says that our cats, when my sister's going to get married or find a guy, if the cats don't like him, my sister's not allowed to marry him. That's because I feel like animals are more in tune with the true nature of people more than humans are. We are attracted to faces, not scents, not emotions. We see a good face and we say, great, she looks innocent, she must be. Oh, he looks kind, he must be kind. That's not how the world works, and animals know this better than humans. The first red flag that Rachel has is when she lands on Philip's estate after becoming a widow. She sees Philip and she goes into shock because he seems so similar to Ambrose, her dead husband. If someone looks so much like your dead husband and it hasn't been even a few weeks since you've lost your husband, don't go near that person. You're not going to be rational because you're still going to be mourning the loss of your husband. And when Rachel arrives, she's already digging in. Because of this association with her husband, she is completely done with barriers of formality with Philip because he looks like her husband, right? Within 24 hours of being in this state, she tells Philip, "Tell me what's bothering you." And Philip idiotically spills the tea and hands over the letters that Ambrose had sent him saying that Rachel is my torment. And because of the slip up, well, is it because of a slip up of finding Philip looking like Ambrose, or is it because she's trying to seduce him that she says that she kisses his cheek and says, "This is the first you've ever had," meaning that the kiss is the first kiss he's ever had. She's a little flirty after they open up about him being jealous of her after marrying Ambrose. The next red flag that Rachel has is she keeps on overstaying longer and prolonging her stay by months. she's kind of in awe of the interests that he has in her, that she is so interesting for him. That makes her ego rise. It's kind of evident on the page. And Louise, Philip's friend, says to Philip that she can twist a young man like yourself around her finger. By page 162, Rachel is giving Philip her hairpins and teasing him to put it under his pillow as like a token. If that's not flirtatious, I don't know what is in the 1800s. And just a few pages after that, on page 172, another red flag happens where she gives him another kiss after she is asked by Philip to stay for a few more months. Philip says she took my face between her hands and kissed me while she's in bed. And then she says, bend down. And then she says, now go to bed like a good boy and sleep well. If that's not a red flag, bossy, sexual, erotic, I don't know what is. Furthermore, as another red flag, she spends a lot of money to the point where she goes into debt. She had run off all the money that her late husband had left her, first late husband had left her. And she comes from a very impoverished background. She acts like someone who just won the lottery, who has not been used to money. She just starts spending money immediately when she gets Ambrose's money as well after her second husband dies. It's a bad habit. It's not a crime, but it is a red flag because it might be a motive for her for murder, because she might want even more money and not be told what to do with it. And the last red flag I have about her is she's old and wise, and she says, I'm old and wise. I come from a line of old and wise ladies. But she's using Philip to process her grief. And by that I mean she brings all of Ambrose's stuff with her and she's unpacking it with Philip. And she's processing each item with Philip and she sees him as his companion in grief. But that is kind of abusing Philip because he will get attached. He has abandonment issues. He is an orphan. He was an orphan. He had nobody. Of course he's going to love Ambrose. And she should find her own friends to mourn with and not Philip. And she keeps on using him and staying in that space for processing her grief. Now here comes the really fun part. Let's stack up the red flags that Rachel has against the red flags of Philip. Clearly, Philip has way more red flags than Rachel, and that's why I think that Rachel might be innocent, and that is my best guess. For me, the biggest red flag is growing up in this homosocial relationship where you have one man that you idolize as your intellectual superior, as your role model, and then have that breakdown and not knowing how to have secure attachments. It happens all the time in real life, and if you're not taught properly on having secure attachments, you won't be able to work in the real world. When Philip gets the inheritance from Ambrose, he's given everything: the house, the property, the estates, the money, the cash. He gives them away to Rachel, including all the jewelry, the minute he comes of age. When you don't have secure attachments, when you find a partner in real life, a romantic partner, mind you, you find more in the relationship than really exists, and you start building this artificial world of pleasure and connection that doesn't exist. And this actually happens in friendships as well. Oftentimes, for example, I've studied abroad often, and once a friendship ends in a certain country, I think, was that friendship real or was it just amazing for me? And I have to stop myself from going deeper into that friendship. I do maintain them, but I have to have the maturity to realize that that relationship has spent its course, it's finished, and that I can keep in touch, but I should never assume that that kind of power of camaraderie will go on. I haven't had this experience in romantic relationships. I'm in a very secure marriage, but I have seen in other people that people who haven't had much support around their lives, who haven't had supportive parents, who have had that one person for them and that person disappears, their attachments go haywire. And this book is an exploration of this. It's a mirror for society for how to have healthy attachments. You will make mistakes when you don't have secure attachments. You will assume too much. If Philip was saying his story not in this book but in a court of law, that he hurt Rachel because she must have poisoned him, would it stand up? And I don't think so. It's more his imagination than anything else, because he created this relationship with Rachel that didn't exist beyond what he thought existed. Yes, she flirted with him a little bit. Yes, she saw her dead husband in him. But to not have your sanity to see that happening in front of your own eyes, that's Philip's tragedy. And that's why he makes the mistakes he does throughout the book. Rachel makes as many mistakes as a normal person will do in the moments of grief. Not even a year passes in this novel, and she's processing her grief. And anybody who's lost anyone they love so much, they know that grief takes time, years even. When Philip leads her through negligence to her death, the last word that she says is Ambrose, the name of her dead husband. That, to me, is proof enough of a woman who is trying to get over her grief. Well, that's all I have for you today. Let me know how the first episode of Reading Red Flags was. If you guys want more, if you guys have suggestions, if you guys want me to go into more characters from books that you love, let me know and I will be delighted to deliver. Take care and have a great week.